All right. There we go. Recording in progress, just as I promised. All right, so let's see, go to the chat line and see if any of you have any thoughts, questions, or comments. It looks like a pretty quiet crowd so far. I thought there would at least be something that you were interested in talking about. I'll give you a few more minutes to warm up the fingers and send me something. Until then, I've got to let some more people in. It is a tradition with the power break that I do not begin until I at least get one question. So if you think you can skirt your responsibility for participating, I regret to inform you that I'm going to be asking for someone to send me a message just to make sure that, you're all alive out there. All right, we've got some things flowing in. Thank you. I knew my silence could bring out the best in you. Let's see what's coming in on the chat line. First question, thoughts on a possible rail strike? Yeah, we're reaching the deadline here. I believe on Friday, the bigwigs with the Department of Labor are going to sit down with the labor unions on the railroads and the railroad leadership and try and come up with something that will work for both of them. If they do proceed to a strike, that is not good for the supply chain. Probably even worse than shutting down a 24 million populated city in China. Things are not moving well. Ports are already backed up. You have a rail strike, that really hurts. Undoubtedly, that's the timing of this is designed to inflict maximum pain. Heading into the Christmas season, there's a lot of things that need to get to the stores via rail. Labor unions know this. They know they have the most leverage now, so they are taking advantage of it. Odds of it happening, I think you could see a few days. I would think after that, labor unions will have made their point. They will get some concessions, and then we will get back to work. So I am, perhaps that's the optimistic part of me, but I don't think that's going to be a major months-long strike if it does occur. Thank you for that question. Let's see, when will the market recover? The date, hour, and minute. The date, hour, and minute will be the date, hour, and minute that it recovers. That's as much prognosticated powers as I have. I wish I could tell the future. I would be a lot better at my job. I would also be retired because I could do things well in advance of when they should be done and time things perfectly. It will come back. We do know that. It's throughout history, we've never encountered a time when it's gone down and not ever come back to reach a new record high. The real question is, how long will it take? I wish I could tell you that. I'm lacking in the prognostication department. Can you discuss the market drop this week and what it really looked like? Yeah, we had a humdinger of a day yesterday, didn't we? And that's a technical financial term that you may not read it in the textbooks, but I assure you, humdinger is a financial term. Yeah, and that all comes out of the CPI report that was released yesterday morning and had nothing in there that anybody liked, apparently. If we put that in the context of what's gone on over, say, the last week, you would say, essentially yesterday we gave back the previous 4 days gains. So matter of fact, still at a small profit. We've over the last week, the S&P 500 is still up 1%. But it gets your attention, or at least it gets the media's attention, gives you a little bit of a kick in the gut when the markets are that volatile. Put it in context of even a week and it's a non-event. Put it in the context of 10 years and it's nothing. So that is our gut check for probably the next few months. All right, I don't have anything else coming in the chat line, so that means you are asking for my boring bullet points, and I would hate to let you down, so here they come. We're going to be sharing those on the screen. Keep the comments coming in during our live power breaks. It's very conversational, very back and forth. I love that part of the power break. Anything that you have questions on, just throw it out there. I will try and get to it. So let's dig a little deeper on that CPI report from yesterday that everybody hated. The headline is not so bad. If you look at the CPI, headline inflation went down. It went down to 8.3 in August from 8.5 in July. Seems like, that's a good trajectory, right? That's what the Fed's trying to do, rein in inflation. The problem is all of the economists were thinking it was going to go to 8.1. Didn't meet the mark. Then we look at the core inflation. So that's excluding food and excluding energy. And, that did not go the right direction. That went from 5.9 to 6.3. They were expecting it to go up. All right. They were expecting to go up to 6.1, but it really went up to 6.3. And that is what caused, should we call it a panic attack? Shall we call it a meltdown, a temper tantrum yesterday? Because when you reset core inflation that high, that means the Fed is more likely to raise rates higher and perhaps longer than the markets were anticipating. In fact, they're now looking at, hey, where is the Fed going to top out? And it bumped up a whole quarter of a point just yesterday. Now they're thinking, it may top out around 4 to 4.25% when the Fed is all done. They also repriced everything for coming up next week. Next week, going into that CPI report, there was about an 80-20 chance they were going to raise rates 80% to 75 basis points, 0.75%, 20% chance they were going to stick with 0.5%. After that drop yesterday, after the CPI report dropped, lo and behold, they think there's roughly a 2/3 chance that they're going to raise it 0.75, and there's a full 1/3 chance that they're going to go up a whole 1% next week. I think that's probably unlikely. They like to show consistency. They started with 25, then they go 75, 75, 75, kind of in their rhythm, if you will. So my expectation would be a 0.75% rate hike next week. Just going to the chat to see. Question came in, what does the Inflation Reduction Act mean for me? What a great question. In fact, our special topic of the day looks very in detail at the Inflation Reduction Act. So I'm going to hold your question until we get to that. I promise I will spend quite a bit of time on it, though. With that, next bullet point there is mortgage rates. Wow, they went up yesterday. This is already outdated. I prepared this on Friday and it's already outdated. Mortgage rates really have accelerated. As of Friday, they were at 5.875% for a 30-year mortgage, bumped to 6 yesterday. But using my example, if you borrowed $100,000, and I only use that because it's scalable, you know how much you have to borrow. 100,000 borrowed at 3%, which a year ago, 30-year mortgage, 3% was expensive. 30-year mortgage cost per $100,000 borrowed is $421.60 a month. Fast forward to today, and all of a sudden you're at 5.875%. What does that mean on a dollars basis? That same $100,000 that you borrowed now costs $591.54, a 40% increase. Now, you can either go, you know what, I still want that house. I'm willing to pay that much more. Or you can take a different approach. If that lower payment really appeals to you, that $421.60, you could just borrow less. Matter of fact, if you borrowed $71,271.87 at 5.875% for 30 years, you could have that $421.60 payment. And that is the pressure that is coming and has started to develop on housing prices. We know that they were run away last year, right, into early part of this year. Now we started to see them tilt down a little bit, and this is the reason. People can no longer afford it. With a 40% increase in the cost of money, they are going to either stay put or they're not going to offer as much. And this is all part of the Fed's plan. right? They want to slow down housing. They don't want people buying washers and dryers and carpeting and all that stuff, because it leads to demand, which leads to inflation. So their plan is to get housing to slow down. And by our observation, it's likely working. Jumping to the next bullet point. Existing home sales declined 21.5% in July compared to July of 2021. However, the median sale price was 10.6% higher at $410,600. That's the average American home at this point. The 21.5% decline, not due to a lack of inventory. Last year, everybody was, hey, we don't have enough inventory, we can't sell anything. Inventory is roughly the same. It's just that sales have declined by 21.5%. The next piece that did not get a lot of headlines, and I feel it should have, was the non-farm productivity report for July. Non-farm productivity plummeted in the second quarter, decreasing 4.1%. This represents a 2.4% decline on a year-over-year basis, and the largest ever year-over-year decline since this data set began in 1948. What does that have to do with anything? Well, think about productivity. Productivity is the amount of hours it takes a person to produce all of our people to produce our gross domestic product, what we manufacture, what we service, entertainment industry, everything. How long does it take on average to produce that when you look at the hours? And the sad part is we're getting less done than ever. Well, that's probably an exaggeration, but our productivity declined by the most ever in the second quarter. So even with the kiosks that you're encountering at fast food restaurants, even with the self-checkouts that you're manning yourself on the retail side of things, even with all those technology advances and, where you have one person monitoring 6 registers instead of one person at one register, even with all of that, we are getting less done on an hourly basis than we were a year ago, which is a problem. And that goes to the next bullet point. What are the economic impacts of lower productivity? And the natural answer is inflation, because if companies have to pay more people to do the same amount of work, they're going to pass those prices right along to you. Congratulations. And it's going to show up in inflation. So that's one statistic that merits watching. It is undoing a lot of what the Fed is trying to do. Gonna check, see if anything's on the chat line here. I've got nothing coming in, so I'm going to keep going. Last bullet point on the economy. As of July, there were 11,239,000 unfilled jobs in the United States. Now, this is like priority number one for the Fed. They're bringing housing down. Why are they doing that? It's to get these unfilled jobs filled or erased. And what do I mean by that? So right now you have 11 million jobs open. That means employers are increasing wages, increasing benefits, competing for employees. As those go up, that means that costs are rising. It creates what's called a wage inflation cycle that becomes self-reinforcing. The Fed's intent is to slow the economy down, hopefully not tip it into a recession, but that's not out of the question. Slow it down so that many of these unfilled jobs, either the employer decides they don't need people, or the unemployment rate even ticks up. Chairman Powell has been very clear that there's going to be some pain in order to get inflation under control, and that's exactly what he's talking about. The question becomes whether they can successfully bring down the economy and land it softly where, these 11 million jobs are no longer needed, or if they're going to bring it down hard and the unemployment rate is going to spike. If I have to bet dollars to donuts, I think we could end up in a recession next year. Keep in mind, there are two kinds of recessions. There's recessions and recessions. And I think this would be closer to the recession than the major downfall. For the simple reason that the Fed has a lot of wiggle room. They're gonna be watching the statistic. They're gonna know when the jobs are starting to fall. They're gonna know when unemployment is creeping up, and they will probably take action to pause or start reducing rates to counteract that. All right, checking the chat line. This is the last call for any economic questions that you may have. Seeing none, I'm going to wander onto the markets, which are not all that encouraging. If you like positive signs, I challenge you to find a positive sign in the orange, blue, or green boxes that are displayed on your screen. The only way you can do it is if you take your cursor and hold over it and it turns into a plus sign, and that's cheating. It has been a rough 12 months. It doesn't seem like it's been 12 months, but it's been a rough 12 months for the markets. You can see that in the green box. There's nothing that is not down 10%, even bonds, because interest rates have risen so rapidly. Even August was not good. July was good. Now, if we had a power break in August, you'd be very happy because July was a very good month. June was not a very good month. So we're kind of in this choppy, what do you want to call it? Range probably is the best word, where the markets are kind of evaluating, very sensitive to economic releases. We learned that yesterday. Very sensitive to economic releases and projecting, is the Fed going to tip us into a recession or are they not? Right now, if you had to take bets, probably 60–70% chance that we'll see a recession. But there's still a camp out there that says, we're not actually going to see a recession. We're going to pull through this just fine. Do keep in mind that as long-term investors with long-term financial plans, even the 1 month, the 6 month, or the 12-month returns are not impactful to your long-term plan. It's the orange that matters down here, and that's on the 10-year average, and those are all positive. Given enough time, markets tend to work out whatever kinks they get themselves into. In fact, mathematically, and this is a little secret of investing, mathematically, if you buy when the markets are lower, it's advantageous because then it goes up. Tuck that in that feather in your cap and keep it in mind when you see screaming headlines like yesterday about, oh, the market's 5% more on sale. And if you phrase it that way, it doesn't sound nearly as panic-stricken as the talking heads were yesterday. I do have to pause and highlight 2 positive numbers on this page in the last 3 months. Mid-cap stocks on the growth side, small-cap stocks on the growth side have had positive returns over the last 3 months. The only reason I pause there is because, well, it's the only positive number I can dwell on, and I don't want to be a real negative person. Of course, if you look over the last 12 months, that's rather unseemly, opportunistic. From a market mood meter standpoint, and again, what we use this tool to help our clients understand what the market is feeling, and henceforth it may rub off on them occasionally. But more importantly, what should you do when you're feeling like that? So, for example, back in October and January, when the market was feeling confident and thrilled, our advice was, let's take a look at how much you have allocated to stocks and see if we should sell some while it is higher. And naturally, when things tumble a little bit like they did in June, our advice is, I know that didn't feel good, but maybe we should look at the amount of stocks in your portfolio and see if we should buy some to stay level with your allocation. So our intent is always to keep your allocation reasonably static, knowing that the markets are going to corrupt it the day after we get it perfect, but keep it relatively static, adding to stocks when they go down, trimming back from stocks when they go up. Right now, the market is, well, after yesterday, it went down a little bit. It is actually at nervous at the close of business today, kind of right in the middle. Kind of at a real important point with the market. It's got to decide whether it is going to try and head up again or head down again. right now is just chopping around. That may hold true through the elections or until the market thinks they have the elections predicted properly, typically mid-October. So the next month could be a lot of chopping. As I say to my kids affectionately, when they are facing challenges, buckle up, Buttercup. Could be a little choppy over the next month. All right, gonna go over and see if we have any other comments on the chat. Seeing none, I'm gonna go back up to my bullet points. We've covered the market mood meter. We've covered the bond traders. Wanted to take a little closer look at the inverted yield curve. You've probably heard about that in some way, shape, matter, or form. What is that? First off, just from a perspective standpoint, on December 31st, the 10-year Treasury yielded 1.52%. As of September 12th, 3.37%, more than doubled in, call it, 9 months. That is unheard of volatility in the bond market. That just does not happen. So you have lived through, so far this year, you have lived through one of the worst bond markets in history. So congratulations on surviving that. For a lot of people, that would be like, that's really bad news. And I look at it from the other perspective. On December 31st, you could earn only 1.5% by investing in bonds. And now you can earn, well, as of yesterday, almost 3.5% in bonds. So as I look forward over the next 10 years, I kind of expect that my bonds are going to give me 3.5, where just at the last year, I was assuming 1.5. I think that's really good news. I think we can get more return for less risk over the next decade than we did the previous decade. On to the inverted yield curve that I promised you. So what does an inversion mean? An inversion means lower maturing debt, or 1 month, 3 months, 6 months maturing debt is earning more than longer term debt. That's kind of weird. Normally, if you buy a CD or something, you'd say, well, the 1-year CD should pay less than the 5-year CD. But things are tipped upside down in the bond world right now. For example, the 10-year was at 3.37, but if you want a 6-month US Treasury bond, you can get 3.5. And these kind of inversions tend to precede recessions. Now, it's not always true. I like to say inverted yield curves predict 10 out of every 8 recessions. So it's right about 80% of the time within 2 years, but it's 80% and it's 2 years. So it's not telling you to, Katie, bar the hatches, we're starting a recession tomorrow. It's saying the market is looking ahead and saying the conditions are not as favorable 6 to 24 months out. A lot is made of the yield curve and people define it differently. For example, in the media, they're shouting about the 10-year being less than the 2-year. The Fed, when they look at a yield curve inversion, they're looking for the 10-year to be less than the 3-month. And you can see that's not inverted, strangely enough. I tend to look at something in between, like 6 months, 10 years, and that's where I'm saying, there are more odds than not that we could see a recession within the next 6 to 18 months. Another topic that has not had a lot of press that I've seen is the US dollar. It's tumbled a little, of course, since I wrote this on Friday, but as of Friday, it was up 13.5% so far in 2022. That's actually helpful for keeping inflation in check, if I dare to call 8.3% in check. But when you have a stronger dollar and you're a net importer, which the United States certainly is, you have to pay less dollars for the junk you're buying from overseas. So that actually has been a disinflationary force. In this time of inflation, that has been a disinflationary force. The downside of a strong dollar is that if you are a US company selling things overseas, it's not as profitable, because when you turn those euros or yen or whatever you're converting from back into dollars, you're not getting as many dollars, which means either you have to raise your prices overseas in the local currency, you have to pay to hedge your currency risks, or you're just going to have to make less money. So that's something to keep an eye on. And finally, I'm going to touch on the VIX index. Again, just a reminder what the VIX index is. It's a volatility index that indicates traders' uncertainty over the next 30 days. And they do that by looking at the number of calls and the amount of calls, if you're familiar with options that traders are buying, and the amount of puts and the range of puts that the traders are buying. A big VIX means traders have no clue what's going to happen in the next 30 days. A small VIX means they think they got it all figured out. Over history, it's averaged around 20, and it's bumped up again. It's above average at this point. It was hit 26 on September 6th. So I wrote that on Friday, but lo and behold, yesterday, you can imagine the VIX went even higher. Strangely enough, over the last 3 days, the 9-day VIX, so that's what do traders think will happen the next 9 days, has been higher than the 30-day VIX. So that says the next 9 days are less predictable than 30 days. And again, I would see that as and maybe I'm coining this term, I'm not sure it's out there, I would call that a VIX inversion, where certainly, 30 days should be less predictable than 9 days, but that's not the way traders are viewing the market at this point. Just another sign that you can expect some more volatility going forward. Okay, I have wrapped up the markets unless you guys have specific questions. Not getting a lot on the chat line. I am sure your fingers can work. I'm sure you may have questions. I'm sure I may trigger something that you would want to talk about, but seeing none at this point and stalling specifically so you have time to type, I think I'm going to move on to our special topic of the day that I promised I would get to. All right, we're going to go there. So the special topic for the day, we'll spend maybe half an hour on this, is what is really in the Inflation Reduction Act. And the reason I picked this topic is because it seems like the left is going to really brag about this for the next few months, and the right is really going to really skewer it. So I thought, well, why not be the neutral party and look through at actually what's in it? Because I have not seen any news reports that go into any detail in terms of what is actually in the bill. A lot of social media posts, a lot of hearsay, a lot of talking points, but very few facts. So I thought I would dive into it and hopefully help you be a little more educated about what is actually in the bill. Broke it down into sections, kind of digestible bites, and then the impact on you. Certainly continue to throw out those questions as we go along, as you have them. So the first section, which got a lot of headlines, was the tax increases and the enforcement. So starting in 2023, it creates a corporate alternative minimum tax of 15%. It only applies to U.S. headquartered companies with global revenue over a 3-year average, over $1 billion. So if you have a company that hauls in more than $1 billion, you're going to be subject to this corporate alternative minimum tax. All right, so merits one question. What is an alternative minimum tax? And there is actually an alternative minimum tax on the personal side as well. It's really an alternative tax universe where you have the privilege of calculating your taxes twice. So the first time you go through and take all your credits and deductions and everything else that you're entitled to under the normal tax code, and then you go through and refigure them under the different rules, the alternative minimum tax rules, which gets rid of a lot of deductions and credits and all other things. And you have the privilege, after calculating it twice, of paying the higher amount. In this case, Congress said, well, that higher amount for corporations is going to be 15%. So if you were using research and development credits and you were using all sorts of other credits and shelters and all this stuff, you're going to be paying at least 15% starting next year. The question for you is, who ends up paying that 15% in the long run? If you answered, well, companies are going to try and maintain their profit margins to counterbalance all the cyclical things they have to do, you're probably right. They're going to build that in as a cost, which will then be passed along to consumers in some way, shape, manner, or form. Doesn't have to necessarily be in higher prices. It can be in a lower quality product. It can be in less product. Shrinkflation, I believe, is the term for that. But at some point, for the companies that are subject to this, they are either going to do that, or I guess the other solution is to relocate and not be a US headquartered company anymore. Move to Ireland, the Bahamas, someplace else that has more favorable tax laws. Number 2, it creates a 1% excise tax on stock buybacks. What does that mean? So that means as companies are buying back their own stock, and there's a whole bunch of exceptions to this rule. I didn't want to list them here. I didn't understand some of them, but there are some exceptions. But in general, if they're going to do stock buybacks, they have to pay a 1% excise tax to the government on the amount of stock that they repurchase. The reason this is in here is because according to the Congressional Budget Office, which is the budget authority for Congress, it raises revenue. And so it's meant to offset some of the costs of the bill. The interesting piece is companies have a lot of things they can do with their excess cash. Well, one of them is certainly buy back shares, which reduces the number of shares, theoretically increases the earnings per share, increases the remaining stocks that are out there, the value. So it kind of increases the stock value. But they can do other things. They don't have to buy back their stock. They can pay dividends. So you could see, as a result of this, you could see dividends as more favorable than stock buybacks. They could also invest more in capital. I mean, they can do a lot of things. They don't have to. This 1% excise tax is easily avoidable by not buying back stock and doing something else with the money. So I'm not sure how the Congressional Budget Office scored this. I suppose I could look it up for you, but I have a sneaking suspicion it's not going to raise as much revenue as they were anticipating. All right, still no questions. Number 3, this is the one you've heard about, I'm sure. Increases the Internal Revenue Service funding by $78,900,000,000 through 2031, spent in the following specific areas. $3.2 billion for taxpayer services. Now, having had clients who deal with the IRS, I can say their service has not been stellar. I think that's a good way to put it. So an upgrade there is probably not a bad thing. $45.6 billion for tax enforcement, hiring new auditors, new employees to pick up enforcement. You've heard a lot about that. $25.3 billion for operational support. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but think more employees. And then D, $4.8 billion for technology improvements. That, again, I am strongly in favor of. The IRS is working off of software from the 1980s, and every time they have to reprogram something, it takes forever. Honestly, if I was Congress, and I'm not, I would have put more money there than anywhere else, because I think that naturally picks up enforcement if you employ artificial intelligence in analyzing tax returns. But I have very little say in terms of what Congress does. And finally, the last piece in 2023, so starting next year, it reinstates a Superfund excise tax on every barrel of crude oil. This tax expired in 1995. They're renewing it. They're increasing it. They're setting the tax at 16.4 cents per barrel, so it's not a huge amount, and adjusts that tax for inflation. So that tax will continue to go up. If inflation goes up, which is kind of driven by oil prices occasionally. So if oil prices go up, it increases the price of oil. I mean, it's not much, but you can also expect that will marginally increase the cost of anything that uses petroleum. Impact of all of these pieces on you, probably higher costs as companies pass along additional taxes to consumers. You won't anticipate that next year, but they're going to start building that in toward the end of next year, 24, 25. Slightly higher fuel costs, you probably won't even notice it. 16% per barrel is not that much. But as it adjusts for inflation, it becomes a quarter and then $1, and then pretty soon it actually means something. And the great news is you will get better service and more audits from the IRS. So that is from a tax increase and enforcement standpoint, where I see the impact on our clients. Checking for any messages, seeing none. I talk way too much during this power break, guys. My voice is giving out. All right, let's go on to the healthcare provisions that are included in the Inflation Reduction Act. So number one, if you remember during COVID, one of the pieces in the COVID relief bill was that it made marketplace insurance policies more affordable, more subsidized. It did that by making more people eligible to receive more premium subsidies. This bill extends that until 2026. So it was scheduled to expire at the end of 2023. Hold on, no, end of this year. And they extended it for another 4 years. What that means is if you are on one of the marketplace insurance exchanges, that you are not going to pay more than 8.5% of your income toward premiums, no matter how much you make. They used to cap that at people who make, oh, don't quote me on this, but it was around like $200,000. But now you can make as much as you want, as long as, and your premiums will be capped at 8.5% of income based on a silver plan. And again, you can upgrade or downgrade at your leisure. Honestly, this is a provision that will probably continue to be extended perpetually. These temporary programs all start out as nice ideas. They get extended a few years at a time, and then eventually they become permanent. It's just kind of the way government works. All right, you've also heard about Medicare can now negotiate with drug companies. And I honestly had no idea what that meant before I started digging into this and reading exact provisions. So the first thing, the impression I had was that all drugs, Medicare can negotiate with every drug company and drive all prices down. And that's not the case. They are only talking about drugs that meet specific criteria, and that's included in A. Number one, the drug is produced by a single company and it's high cost. Number two, it has been 7 years since the FDA approved it. And number three, no generic version is available. So those are the only drugs that Medicare can negotiate with healthcare companies on in terms of price. Furthermore, under C, it's not even all of those. It's limited. So starting in 2026, and again, so that's 4 years down the line, you won't see any impact on this for 4 years. So starting in 2026, they're going to take the top 10 highest cost qualifying prescription drugs in Part D only, and they're going to be negotiated. They expand that to 15 in 2027. They take the top 15 of Part B and Part D in 2028. And from 2029 forward, they're going to take the top 20 that are in Part B and D and make them subject to negotiations. What does that mean? I mean, how do you negotiate, right? Well, the process they've laid out is that Medicare is going to propose a price based on their calculations of a fair price. So basically, whatever Medicare thinks is a fair price, they're going to go to the drug company and go, hey, here's what we think is a fair price. You have 30 days to accept it or counter offer. I would imagine roughly 100% of those are going to be counter offered, because I really have no idea how you establish a fair price. That's another aspect to more and more legislation. It's not just this bill, more and more legislation. Congress is leaving a lot of the details to the agencies to write the rules. It used to be Congress would lay everything out and say, these are the rules, this is the way we want it to work. More and more they're going, here's the concept, you run with it and make regulations on it. Kind of abdicating their role, if you will, a little bit. Okay, I went off on a soapbox. I apologize for that. So after they go through the negotiation, then the price Medicare recipients pay would be capped at the negotiated price. And again, that kicks in for 10 drugs starting in 2026, and then gradually expands up to 20 drugs by 2029 and thereafter. All right. The next one, I think, is even more impactful, and I did not even know this was in the bill. It requires drug companies to provide rebates to Medicare if their drug prices rise more rapidly than inflation. I found that very interesting. I'm not sure how that's going to work, but I found that provision very intriguing. Finally, number 4, more Medicare changes. Medicare Part D. So starting in 2024, if you have very high prescription drug costs, eventually you go through the copays, you go through the donut hole, you come out the backside and with catastrophic coverage, and you still have to pay 5% of your drug costs after that. Starting in 2024, that 5% disappears. So if you have really, really, really expensive drug costs in Part D, eventually you're going to reach a point where you don't pay anymore. The government covers all of it. Starting in 2025, this bill caps total out-of-pocket costs at $2,000 for Medicare Part D. That essentially means the donut hole, the dreaded donut hole, kind of disappears. You're out of pocket once you hit $2,000. Medicare is going to pick up the rest. The bill also caps premium increases at 6% per year through 2029. So insurance companies cannot raise their premiums by more than 6%. You can imagine that you will be seeing 6% increases in your premiums because they would be foolish not to increase it by less in case the next year they should have increased it by more. So I think this naturally logically makes the premiums go up by 6% almost automatically. Expands eligibility for low-income assistance for Medicare Part D, and then also eliminates cost sharing on CDC recommended vaccines starting in 2023. So starting next year, if there is a CDC recommended vaccine, it is free if you are on Medicare Part D. Whew. All right, what is the impact to you? Obviously, marketplace healthcare plans are more affordable for the uninsured. Likely lower Medicare costs and prescription drug costs in the future. You're not going to see those shown up. Matter of fact, with the cap on premiums on Part D, you actually could see your Medicare premiums, at least the Part D part, go up more rapidly than it otherwise would have. The good news is for Medicare recipients is that next year's Part B premium is looking like a very modest increase, if anything. You'll remember 2022, there was this big jump in Part B premiums due to the approval of an Alzheimer's drug. But they have restricted the use of that, so they may not be paying as much as they anticipated, and therefore the Part B premiums for next year may not go up much. We can hope. Alrighty. Next up, energy production tax incentives, other energy tax incentives. There is a whole lot going on here, folks, and I'm not going to read this all to you because my voice is going to give out. Needless to say, the encouragement, they are enticing companies and individuals to adopt electric, battery-operated, non-fossil fuel burning power plants, equipment, vehicles, developing solar, geothermal, hydropower, everything. They do try and simplify things a little bit here. So some of these credits that are already on the books, they extended through 2024 and then replaced it with something else. So to some degree, things are going to get a little simpler, but until then, it's a little more complicated. Interestingly, it does create a new credit starting in 2024 for nuclear power plants. Think of California, for example, which just unveiled this initiative to have all electric vehicles by 2035, I believe it is. But they have power challenges. If they're going to meet those, they should start building nuclear power plants now, so they have all of the energy they need come 2035 and beyond. All credits are quintupled if specific prevailing wage, apprentice labor, and domestic content requirements are met. So I'm going to say that again. If you pay, and you can read this, union wages, use apprenticeship labor, and have domestic content requirements. And again, those went way arcane, and I didn't want to bore you more than I am already. But if those are met, the credit is 5 times if you don't do that. So they're trying to incentivize people to use union labor, use apprenticeships, and use domestic content. One of the challenges with this domestic content is we don't quite make all the stuff we need at this point. So I think they're also trying to encourage more independence, more self-sufficiency in that regard. Still no comments. I'm afraid you guys have fallen asleep, or I'm talking to myself at this point. All right. More energy tax incentives, kind of covered that already. Carbon sequestration credit, credits for hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuel, biodiesel, all sorts of fuel credits. Here's one that could impact you if you're interested in buying an electric vehicle. They are number one, trying to incentivize the creation of the infrastructure for electric vehicles. So they have a credit up to $100,000 for installing charging stations. So if you go to Culver's, or you go to Quick Trip, or you go to McDonald's and they have a charging station there, they probably got a tax credit to put that in going forward. You can get up to a $7,500 credit to purchase plug-in electric vehicles if you make under 300,000. This is interesting. I found this kind of restrictive. To qualify for the full 7,500, the battery in the new vehicle must meet both mineral sourcing and manufacturing criteria. So they're going to have to certify these cars that the battery had certain amounts from certain countries, and just very complicated. Obviously, one of the challenges with expanding battery vehicles is that you need a boatload of precious industrial metals that are not necessarily readily available. So that's one of the limitations that we may run into and cause the price of these vehicles to rise, is it takes having trouble sourcing those rare earth minerals. If you want to buy a used, previously owned plug-in vehicle, you can get up to $4,000 or 30% of the purchase price. Just make sure the vehicle is more than 2 years old, your AGI is under 150, and the vehicle was purchased for less than $25,000. I think maybe you're starting to understand why they need so many new IRS agents, because implementing all of these tax incentives and making sure who requires for what is going to take a lot more power. Maybe that whole enforcement thing is for these tax credits instead of on the upper income that they are aimed at. The final piece is energy efficiency. So they're trying to drive people to install more energy efficient things in their home. For example, windows, doors, water heaters, heat pumps, HVAC, $1,200 per year. That credit expires in 2032. More credits to make your home, your office, everything more tax efficient. There already is a new energy efficient home credit that home builders can claim. They extended that. They can get up to $2,500 if they meet certain Energy Star criteria. So that is just a continuation. So impact on you here. If you're buying a plug-in vehicle, good for you. A used one even. I phrased it as a plethora. I think it's a very underutilized word. Plethora of tax credits and deductions will remain available to making energy improvements to your home or car. Quite complicated. We wonder why the tax code is as thick as it is, and it's all this kind of stuff. All right, the last piece that is in the Inflation Reduction Act is climate change spending. So programs, grants, everything else. So I just listed, kind of give you a headline number by each agency and then just where a majority of the money was spent. There is so much granular detail in here that you could drive yourself nuts. So I left it at a high level. Interestingly, the department that got the most money in this bill is not the Environmental Protection Agency. It is the Department of Agriculture. That surprised me. And 20 billion of the $47 billion that was allocated for the Department of Agriculture is going to conservation programs. Think conservation reserve program, things to help farmers, pay farmers not to farm, conservation programs like that. Rural renewable energy, assistance to underserved farmers, and I have no idea how this made it in here, given the Speaker of the House, but U.S. Forest Service fire prevention management as part of that. A little bit of help for California there. All right, I've got some questions that just popped up on the chat line. Let me check those out and see what we have. Looking into your crystal ball, what do you think the future holds if we continue one-party rule after the November election? And then another one, effective midterm elections on 2023 on the economy. Okay, so we'll put this on hold for a second and talk about the upcoming elections. So you know that happens in November. Earlier this year, Republicans were like so confident that they were just going to rule the roost in the Senate and the House. And, you know, things were looking bad. And then the Democrats did quite a few good things for their election chances. Number one, they got Mr. Manchin on board, and they have this bill to talk about. They have something positive to talk about. They have Medicare changes to talk about. They have energy things to talk about. And they pay for it all by taxing corporations. Those make great commercials, no doubt about it. Second thing they did is they spent money encouraging people to vote for weak Republican candidates in primaries. So they ran TV and radio advertising so they could select the candidate, or at least encourage voters to support the candidate that they wanted to run against. And they have nominated some honestly kind of weird people to run on the Republican ticket in some House races. And thirdly, you had a major issue for Democrats that came to the headlines in the Roe versus Wade ruling that really motivated their base, a good chunk of their base. So Republicans were expecting to easily take over the Senate and the House earlier this year. I'd say at this point, the House still looks likely, just where we're at. The Senate, we're about 50-50 there, I think, in terms of whether the Republicans would be able to gain a majority. Again, they have to get 51. 50 is not enough. But they have some weak candidates running in the Senate. And they also have some pretty strong ones. And they have some challenging races where Democrats have fielded strong candidates. So a lot of it depends on how Americans are feeling come November. So if you see gas prices spike going into November, that would bode well for Republicans, poor for Democrats. If you see inflation reports continue to come down and gas prices continue to go down, that would bode well for Democrats and poor for Republicans. So what is the impact? If the opposition party at this point, Republicans, takes over the 1 or 2 houses, obviously that slows down the legislative process. It doesn't become what do we want to do as one party? How far can we push? It becomes far more negotiated, far more cumbersome, and almost nothing gets done. Which sounds like a bad thing, but really the markets love it when Congress doesn't get anything done, because it makes the future much more predictable in terms of the rules and regulations and taxes that they have to live under. If you look at stock market history, the best situation is to have a Democratic president and Republican Congress. That's the holy grail of what the markets could ask for, simply because nothing gets done. All right. I'm off of politics. I'm back on my talking points until you distract me again. So that's the Department of Agriculture. The Environmental Protection Agency, you would assume that they would get a lot of money given the section of this bill. They create a new greenhouse gas reduction fund. Essentially, it's going to offer grants and cost sharing with private companies who develop technologies for reducing greenhouse gas. So you're going to have a lot of companies that apply for these grants, use them for research and to develop products. Grants for zero emission heavy trucks, reduce pollution at ports. Again, that's another California thing. Climate pollution reduction grants, methane reduction programs. 10 bonus points to whoever can tell me what is responsible for the largest methane production on our planet on the chat line. 10 bonus points. You can cash those in later for an unnamed prize. Environmental and climate justice block grants. Those are going to go out to the states. If you're thinking you know the answer to the methane question, there we go. Dairy industry, cows. We have a winner. And then I found this interesting. Grants to develop school environmental quality plans. So trying to improve the air specifically around schools. Grants to states to start programs to do that. So that's the EPA, $42 billion that they get to spend. Department of Energy, well, they're at the top of the list. Yeah, that's kind of natural. Their biggest expense is $9 billion. That's going to go to state energy offices, think Energy Star programs to encourage appliance replacements, home energy savings. So you qualify for Energy Star rebates in addition to those credits that we talked about earlier. Grants to states to update building codes to be more energy efficient. So they want to make, if you build a new building, they want you to build it to higher spec on the energy efficiency front. Naturally, that will lead to higher costs in terms of buildings, which could raise the value of real estate, existing real estate. Additional funding for national laboratories for research, new financing to improve old energy, new cost sharing program to reduce emissions from energy intensive industries. So again, paying companies to reduce their emissions. So that's Department of Energy. Then it really falls off. So Department of Energy got $35 billion. Department of Interior gets $6.5 billion. This first bullet point is nothing you heard about in the mainstream media, the talking heads, the newspaper headlines. This bill actually requires leasing of specific oil reserves on the Gulf of Mexico. So these are offshore drilling leases. It requires the Department of the Interior to move forward with 3 specific leases in the near future. I think that was partly to satisfy Mr. Manchin. Honestly, if you look at the number of mining, drilling, offshore drilling leases that have been issued in the Biden administration, it has plummeted for public lands. So this is just one piece that says, hey, let's drill for more oil and try and bring the cost down. It increases the royalties on mining and drilling. So that's a revenue raiser. Establishes offshore wind leases. So not only can you set up oil rigs out in the Gulf or off the coast, it sets up rules for establishing wind, if you want to put a wind farm off the coast. And then additional funding for the National Park Service. Specifically, as it's worded in the bill, this is for resiliency. And I always try and give you a little hint of words that you're going to be seeing more of in the future. It's part of my vocabulary enhancement service I provide. You'll be seeing resiliency more. It's a growing buzzword, making things resilient. So keep your eyes open for resiliency. You'll be sick of that like you were sick of robust a few years ago. Department of Transportation gets $5.5 million. Most of that goes to grants to the states for neighborhood access and equity. I honestly don't know what that means. The General Service Administration, they're the ones who operate federal buildings. They get $2 billion to use low carbon materials in federal buildings and upgrade them, make them high performance green buildings. So a little remodeling coming to your federal buildings. Department of Commerce gets 3.3, coastal communities to enhance climate resilience. There's that word again. Also new NOAA computer capabilities to predict hurricanes. That's $190 million there. The Postal Service for $3 billion, zero emission vehicles. Any of you living in Oshkosh goes, yeah, Oshkosh truck actually has a good part of that contract. And then some minor things for HUD, energy efficiency and affordable housing, environmental programs, Homeland Security. And I found this interesting. Department of Defense got half a $500 million, and it has to be used to administer the Defense Production Act to accelerate production of energy efficient materials. So, the government has power to go to private companies and say, hey, we're switching what you make and we're going to compensate you for it. Government can now do that to produce energy efficient materials. Impact on you on this, $300 billion worth of spending, probably minimal. States and cities will be eligible for substantial grants for various new programs. As it filters down to you, probably you won't see much of the impact outside of maybe an Energy Star rebate here and there. All right, that's the end. Rather unceremonious, I know. This is where I got that information from. Those are my disclosures, so everything has been shared with you. All right, I'm going to give you one more chance to ask one more question, and then we're going to shut this down. In the meantime, while you're thinking about what question you want to ask, number one, thank you for participating. Appreciate it. Hope you found it at least somewhat insightful, occasionally sarcastic, and in any way, completely honest. Our next power break is scheduled for December. Hard to say that word because it'll be snowing by then potentially. I have no idea what we're going to talk about. If you have an idea, shoot it my way. I normally pick it a week or 2 or 3 in advance to try and make it very current. May have elections to talk about. We may have a recession to talk about. We may have other things. We'll figure it out when we get there. And none of you have any other more questions. So at this point, I'm going to say thank you again. It's been a pleasure joining you. Do have an awesome rest of September, and Lord willing, we'll see you in December, if not sooner. Take care. God bless.